Under the gray, endless stretch of sky that hung over the outskirts of Brookpine Village, Anna Morton gripped the handles of her son's wheelchair a little tighter, guiding him along the uneven sidewalk that wound past rows of neatly trimmed hedges and picket fences. It was a chilly April afternoon, the kind of day that whispered of spring but still clung stubbornly to winter's breath. The air carried a crispness that cut through Anna's jacket, but she barely noticed. Her focus was on the boy in front of her, and the rhythmic squeak of one of the rear wheels, a sound she had grown to recognize like a familiar voice. Her son, Tom, 11 years old, thin as a sapling but sharp-eyed and thoughtful, sat quietly as they moved, his hands folded on his lap, his gaze drifting toward the houses that lined their new street. It had been a long journey to get here, months of planning, paperwork, downsizing, and emotional labor that Anna rarely spoke about. She hadn't moved to Brookpine for the community or the charm of its suburban calm. She had moved because the sidewalks were advertised as ADA accessible, the public infrastructure modern and spacious, and the crime rate low enough to offer her son a peaceful place to grow up without fear or chaos. After what they had been through, Tom's diagnosis, the surgeries, the night terrors, the slow, painful shift from walking to wheeling, peace wasn't just a desire, it was a necessity. Their new home was modest, a single-story ranch with aging shingles, an overgrown backyard, and a porch that needed repainting. But it was theirs, bought with the last of the insurance payout, and every cent Anna had saved from tutoring high school students in math and biology. She didn't allow herself to think of the sacrifices. They were irrelevant now. What mattered was the future she was trying to build for Tom and for herself. The town's website had boasted inclusivity, progress, and a vibrant local community. Anna had imagined late afternoon walks, neighbors waving kindly, her son finally feeling like he belonged somewhere. She had pictured a version of life where the world didn't feel like a maze of locked doors and steep curbs. The illusion lasted exactly 43 hours. They were on their second full day in the neighborhood, a Sunday, the air heavy with the smell of mulch and lawn clippings, when Anna first saw the obstruction. The sidewalk ran smoothly for several blocks, wide enough for the chair, no cracks, no uneven rises. But as they rounded the corner near the tall, pale blue house on the end of Willow Loop, the concrete path abruptly vanished. In its place stood a series of large ceramic planters, terracotta, waist-high, filled with manicured hydrangeas. They spanned nearly the entire width of the sidewalk, forcing the path to funnel into a narrow curve that veered into what appeared to be private yard space. A decorative white fence ran behind the planters, clean and bright, adorned with small brass plaques that said, "Private, no passage." Anna stopped. Tom looked up at her, confusion blooming in his features. She stepped forward and tried to maneuver the chair gently around the first planter, but the grass dipped at an awkward angle, and the wheels stuttered. Anna backed up and tried another approach, angling from the driveway side, but the narrow curve was impossible to pass without lifting the chair, and she knew better than to risk a tip. Before she could try again, the front door of the blue house creaked open. A woman emerged, tall, thin, early 60s, with frosted blonde hair styled into a perfect shell. She wore a pale pink sweater over slacks and held a white mug in both hands, as if she were posing for a greeting card. Her eyes, however, held no warmth. "Excuse me," she called, not moving from the threshold. "That's private property." Anna turned, adjusting her stance but keeping her tone measured. "The sidewalk ends here. We're just trying to pass." "There's a sign," the woman said, gesturing toward one of the brass plaques. "This section isn't public. It belongs to my lot." Anna blinked. "The sidewalk?" "Yes, this part. It was grandfathered in. Beautification clause, years ago. This whole corner is maintained privately. It's not meant for traffic." She paused, her eyes scanning Tom's chair with something close to distaste. "Certainly not heavy use like that." Anna's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to speak calmly. "There's no other way to pass without going into the road." The woman shrugged, sipping from her mug. "Then I suggest you do that." Tom's voice, soft but clear, floated upward. She means the street? Anna nodded to him and turned back to the woman. There's no curb cut on this corner. He can't get down safely. Well, I didn't design the roads, dear, the woman said with a thin smile. I'm sure the city has their reasons. In the meantime, please respect the signage. Anna didn't reply. She turned the chair slowly, retreating the way they had come. Tom said nothing more, but she felt the quiet shift in him like a window that had just closed against sunlight. That night, Anna sat at the small kitchen table with her laptop open, Tom already asleep in the bedroom they shared. She dug into the town's public infrastructure records, scanned PDFs, pored over old city council minutes. Her eyes stung with exhaustion, but she didn't stop. She found references to a residential landscape enhancement program. Initiated 12 years prior, an opt-in program that allowed homeowners to integrate decorative features into public-facing parts of their property, usually front lawns and side fences. But nowhere did it authorize the takeover of pedestrian right-of-way. The sidewalk wasn't private. It was illegal obstruction. Anna called the municipal office first thing Monday morning. She was transferred twice, then placed on hold. After 17 minutes, a soft-spoken clerk informed her that any official complaint about a right-of-way obstruction had to be submitted in writing with photo documentation. The city would investigate and respond within the standard 90-day period. 90 days. She submitted the form that same day, with photos taken from 3 angles. She didn't expect an answer, not anytime soon. But it was a step. That afternoon, when she and Tom went out again, they took the opposite direction. Still, something inside her had begun to shift. A slow, cold realization. This wasn't about flowers or fences. It was about permission, about control. And she had just learned the rules of engagement. In the weeks that followed, Anna tried to maintain normalcy. She took Tom to school, helped him with homework, made their new home feel lived in. She joined the local library, attended one community meeting out of curiosity, and waved politely to neighbors. But she avoided Willow Loop, even when it meant extra blocks added to every walk. The planters remained pristine and unbothered. The woman Karen, as Anna learned from a neighborhood directory, was seen rarely but always seemed to be watching when they passed at a distance. Tom never asked to go that way again. But then, one Friday morning, a letter appeared in the mailbox. It was printed on thick, ivory paper, embossed with the emblem of the local neighborhood association. Inside was a single paragraph informing Anna that her complaint had been received and forwarded for internal review by the Aesthetic Preservation Subcommittee. Any further interference with the landscape property in question, the letter said, could result in sanctions. Sanctions. For asking the city to enforce its own sidewalk laws. Anna folded the letter slowly and laid it on the table beside her untouched coffee. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't pace or rant. She simply picked up her phone and dialed a number she had saved a week ago but hadn't yet dared to use. It rang twice before someone answered. Office of Public Access and Disability Compliance. How may I help you? Anna took a breath. Yes, she said. I'd like to file a formal accessibility barrier complaint. My son uses a wheelchair, and someone in our neighborhood has made the sidewalk impassable. I've tried the city. They're dragging their feet. I need someone who takes the ADA seriously. The woman on the other end paused, then said gently, "You came to the right place." Anna looked out the window. The sun was starting to break through the clouds, but the air still felt cold. She didn't mind. Cold was familiar. And now she had a direction. One Karen wasn't going to like. 3 days after Anna's call to the Office of Public Access and Disability Compliance, a plain white envelope appeared in her mailbox. Unlike the last one, there was no official seal, no branding, nothing to indicate who had sent it. But the moment Anna picked it up, she noticed the quality of the paper. Heavy, expensive. Inside, a short note typed in a narrow serif font We have received word of your complaint and encourage you to consider the implications of escalating local conflicts. For the peace of all involved, cooperation is often more fruitful than confrontation. NAC. No name. No phone number. No return address. Just a strange, veiled warning dressed as advice. She read it twice, then tucked it under her son's math workbook on the counter, hiding it without knowing why. It wasn't a threat, not outright, but it sat in her stomach like a stone. Cooperation. As if she were the one causing conflict. As if asking for a basic right, access to a public sidewalk, was an act of hostility. She didn't show the letter to Tom. There were already too many things he carried in silence. Later that evening she took a walk alone, tracing the sidewalk route without the wheelchair, observing things differently without the constant need to scan for surface hazards. She passed by Karen's home again. The planters were still there, more perfectly arranged than ever, and now a set of small, solar-powered lights lined the base, casting an artificial glow across the area even after sundown. There were new stakes as well, decorative, maybe, but sharp, and planted closely together, forming a kind of visual barricade. The presentation was meticulous, intimidating by design. The next morning, when Anna logged into her email, she found a message from a legal advisor at the Office of Public Access. The tone was formal but kind. The ADA investigator assigned to her case, a woman named Denise Howard, would be contacting her shortly. The email included an attachment, a copy of the federal statute outlining public right-of-way accessibility requirements. Anna printed it and highlighted every line that referenced sidewalk obstructions, noting the specific language that described planters and private landscaping as unauthorized encroachments when placed on public walkways. True to the promise, Denise called later that afternoon. Her voice was smooth, neutral, with a quiet authority that made Anna instantly trust her. She asked detailed questions, took careful notes, and never once interrupted. When Anna finished explaining the situation, Denise said, "This is not just about accessibility. This is about entitlement. I've seen it before. We'll handle it. But I'll need your cooperation." Anna agreed without hesitation. 2 days later, Denise arrived in Brookpine in an unmarked black sedan, her only luggage a flat leather case and a tablet. She wore dark glasses, her graying hair pulled back, dressed in a tailored black blazer that made her look more like a lawyer than an investigator. Anna met her on the porch. They didn't shake hands. Denise simply said, "Show me," and they walked. The assessment took less than 30 minutes. Denise documented the planter obstruction, took photographs, measured the sidewalk width, even tapped at the base of one of the ceramic pots to confirm it was anchored in place. Her tablet recorded everything. Karen didn't emerge during the inspection, though Anna saw movement behind one of the lace-draped windows. Denise looked at the plaques along the fence and took close-up shots. Then, without a word, she moved to the edge of the road, knelt down, and scanned the curb. She muttered something about non-compliant grading and made another note. They returned to Anna's porch. Denise didn't sit. "I'll file the barrier report and attach a legal notice. They'll have 14 days to respond before enforcement begins." Anna nodded, feeling a cautious pulse of hope. Denise's voice was low, but her certainty radiated. "Do they usually comply?" Anna asked. Denise gave her a tight smile. "Eventually, some dig in. But when the law is this clear, there's very little room for defiance." That optimism lasted less than 24 hours. The following morning, Anna stepped outside to find that her recycling bin had been turned upside down and its contents dumped across the driveway. Nothing was taken, but everything was soaked: milk cartons, old mail, Tom's school art projects. She bent down to clean it, jaw clenched, heart sinking. It wasn't the mess that got to her. It was the intent. And when she looked up toward the far end of the block, she saw Karen standing in her garden, pruning a rose bush with deliberate slowness. She didn't wave. She didn't even acknowledge Anna. But she smiled. Later that same day, Anna received an email notification from the neighborhood portal, an alert that a formal concern had been filed against her for creating unnecessary tension and pursuing aggressive legal action without community resolution. It had been submitted anonymously but was clearly about her. The association had flagged her address. No penalty yet. Just a mark. She printed the message and slid it into a folder labeled Compliance. Then she called Denise. That was fast, Denise muttered. I'll escalate. This isn't new for them. They're counting on exhaustion to win. Stay the course. But the pressure began to build. That week, the trash service skipped her house. Twice. A city inspector showed up unannounced to check her water meter, claiming a random audit. And during one afternoon walk, she returned to find that someone had etched a small, deep scratch along the driver's side door of her car. There were no witnesses, no proof. Just a message, you're not welcome here. Denise stayed in town for another 2 days. During that time, she filed the official notice of violation, submitted a formal complaint to the city's Department of Infrastructure, and delivered a sealed envelope to Karen's mailbox, a requirement, she explained, for due process. Karen would have to respond or face enforced removal of the planters. Anna didn't see Denise leave. One morning, she was simply gone, but her work remained. The following Monday, a man in khakis and a company-branded jacket knocked on Anna's door. He introduced himself as Mike from Public Maintenance Enforcement and asked if she could show him the obstruction firsthand. She did, and he took his own photos. Then he turned to her with a shrug. We get these all the time, he said. People think they own everything from fence to curb. They're wrong, but they act like they're not. We'll give her the deadline, but just so you know, some people would rather pay fines forever than move a pot. Anna thanked him and returned inside, her jaw tight. She wasn't asking Karen to move a pot. She was asking for her son's right to move. But apparently that wasn't compelling enough. On Thursday, Tom came home from school unusually quiet. Anna didn't push. That night, he finally spoke while brushing his teeth. Mom, he said through foam and water, someone said I'm getting special treatment because of the chair. They said we're making things worse for everyone. Anna's hand froze mid-reach for the towel. Her heart thudded once hard. She knelt beside him and wiped his chin gently. We're not making anything worse, she said quietly. We're making something better. For everyone, even the ones who don't get it yet. He nodded, but she could see it, doubt creeping in, not about her, but about himself. And that was the worst wound of all. Anna knew then that this wasn't about a planter or a fence or a stretch of sidewalk. It was about something more corrosive, something deeper, an invisible weight placed on people like Tom, disguised as bureaucracy and preference and community harmony. And she knew something else too. They weren't going to stop her. They could skip her trash. They could file anonymous reports. They could scratch her car and snub her at meetings and whisper in the streets. But they couldn't erase the law, and she wasn't going anywhere. Not until every inch of that sidewalk was open. Not until the day her son could roll past that blue house without even noticing it. And not 1 minute before. The first sign that the situation had begun to escalate beyond passive resistance came on a dull, windless Tuesday when Anna found an envelope taped to her front door. It wasn't placed in the mailbox or tucked under the mat like a polite neighborly gesture. It had been deliberately affixed at eye level with translucent packing tape, pressed flat against the wood as though someone wanted to ensure she couldn't miss it. The paper inside was official, but not from any city department or legal authority. It bore the letterhead of the local Architectural Review Committee, a subbody of the Residential Association, and the language inside was carefully curated to sound neutral, while clearly carrying the weight of veiled hostility. It accused Anna of making unauthorized alterations to the sidewalk bordering her property by initiating external inspections without committee review. No fines were issued, but the letter warned that continued unilateral engagement with external entities may result in disciplinary action under community guidelines. Anna read the letter 3 times, trying to decipher the full intent. It wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was an assertion of territory, a declaration of control. She knew the sidewalk in front of her home didn't belong to the committee, and she hadn't altered anything, but they were clearly responding to her previous efforts to bring in the ADA investigator. They were building a narrative, one piece of paper at a time. She made a copy of the letter, slipped it into her growing compliance folder, and forwarded the contents to Denise at the Office of Public Access. Within an hour, Denise replied, "This is not unusual. They're bluffing. Keep everything. Do not respond." Despite the reassurance, Anna felt the tremor of something shifting. There had been pettiness before the scattered trash, the scratched car, but now the association was stepping into the light, flexing the organizational muscle it had previously kept behind fences and smiles. She noticed it more clearly now, the way neighbors would pause slightly when walking past her yard, their conversations dipping in volume as they neared her driveway. The way flyers for community events were suddenly not left at her door. The way the man who walked his 2 golden retrievers every morning now crossed the street early, as though proximity to her had become somehow inconvenient. By the end of the week, she received a notice for a mandatory review, hearing an internal procedural meeting to address the concerns raised by the committee's earlier letter. It was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the clubhouse, a converted colonial structure that sat near the lake at the center of the neighborhood. The notice made it clear that attendance was not optional. Failure to appear could result in sanctions. Anna was no stranger to confrontation in theory. She had stood up to doctors, to insurance bureaucrats, to school administrators who had tried to push her son into less accessible classrooms under the guise of budget limitations. But there was something especially infuriating about being summoned by a group of people who had never once spoken to her, never once asked about her son or his needs, and now claimed authority over her conduct. Still, she knew showing up was important. She would be calm. She would be composed. And she would make it clear that they were stepping beyond their bounds. She arrived at the clubhouse precisely at 6:45. Tom safe at home with a neighbor she trusted, a rare favor offered quietly by an older widow down the street who had once worked as a nurse and knew better than to ask too many questions. The room inside was warmer than expected, a large open space with a vaulted ceiling and too many folding chairs arranged in a loose semicircle. At the far end sat a rectangular table with 5 members of the committee, including a man she recognized from the local welcome packet, Harold Pierce, a retired engineer and current association president. With a voice like dry paper and the posture of someone who believed eye contact was a form of dominance. Karen was there too, seated just off to the side but unmistakably involved, flipping through a folder with a practiced detachment that didn't match the steel in her eyes. Anna took a seat without being asked and waited. No introductions were made. Harold cleared his throat and opened with a brief statement about the purpose of the meeting: to maintain neighborly standards while addressing reports of behavior disruptive to community harmony. Anna didn't speak. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Then they began. The complaints came slowly at first, dressed in neutral language but each laced with clear implication. A committee member brought up Anna's supposed use of non-sanctioned evaluators, suggesting that she had bypassed standard channels and risked reputational damage to the neighborhood. Another spoke about the divisiveness of involving external agencies in what should be resolved internally through communication. Karen never spoke directly, but she passed notes to Harold, and he read them silently before incorporating them into his questions, thinly veiled comments about aggressive tone in emails and public accusations against respected residents. Finally, Anna asked, "Is anyone here willing to say, explicitly, that placing decorative obstacles on a public sidewalk is acceptable under law?" There was silence. Then Harold answered, carefully, "We don't interpret legal statutes. We manage community expectations. And right now, expectations are not being met." She could have laughed, but she didn't. She simply said, "The Americans with Disabilities Act is not a suggestion. It's not an expectation, it's the law. And if you're willing to let your residents break it, then this committee is complicit. The room stilled. No one had anticipated her speaking so directly. And for a brief moment, Anna saw something in Harold's face, not doubt, not guilt, but calculation. They were gauging her threshold, testing to see how far they could push before she broke. That night, when she returned home, she found that someone had driven through her front lawn. The tire tracks were wide, deep, and unmistakably fresh. They had plowed straight across the small garden bed she and Tom had planted together the previous weekend, wildflowers and herbs they had picked out from the local nursery, meant to bring color and life to the new chapter of their lives. Now they lay crushed and tangled, soil flung like shrapnel across the walkway. She didn't call the police. She didn't have proof. But she took photos, time-stamped them, and added them to her folder. Then she stood outside for a long time, looking at the tire ruts, the splattered petals, the ruined curve of earth. The following day, Denise called. Her voice was quieter than usual. "They've hired counsel," she said. "Karen's filed a motion to delay enforcement, claiming the planners are part of a therapeutic arrangement recommended by her doctor. There's no actual medical documentation yet, but the city won't act until it's resolved." Anna didn't answer right away. She leaned against the counter and stared at the refrigerator, where Tom's latest drawing hung on a magnet shaped like a star. It was a picture of a road, a straight one, stretching into the distance, with him and Anna at one end and a house far away at the other. The sun was bright, the sky blue, a drawing from a child who still believed in forward movement. "I'll keep going," Anna said finally, "even if they stall, even if it takes months. I won't let them outweight me." Denise sighed, not in defeat but in quiet solidarity. "Good, because this is exactly what they want, to exhaust you, to make it feel not worth the effort." Anna hung up and walked outside. She spent the rest of the day cleaning the garden, resetting the soil, repotting what could be salvaged. She didn't ask Tom to help, but when he came out later dragging his small hand shovel behind him, she smiled and made room for him beside her. Together they worked until the light faded and the sky deepened to blue-gray. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Every planted bulb, every straightened stone, every moment spent reclaiming something that had been violated, these were acts of quiet resistance. Not everything needed to be shouted to be heard. And even though the sidewalk at the end of the block remained blocked, even though the planters still stood like sentinels of exclusion, Anna felt something shift that evening. Not in the neighborhood, not in the committee, but in herself. She was no longer reacting. She was preparing. The weeks that followed moved with a kind of deceptive stillness, like a lake surface concealing a current beneath. On the surface, things in the neighborhood seemed to return to a kind of uneasy normal. The morning joggers resumed their quiet routines. Dogs barked across fences, and children rode their bikes in uneven zigzags along the sidewalks. But Anna knew better. Silence in this case wasn't peace. It was waiting. It was everyone holding their breath, wondering whether she would continue her fight or eventually fold into the background like others had before her. The association committee had grown quiet, and Karen, in particular, had disappeared from view for a time, no longer tending her garden in plain sight or walking with her usual purposeful strut around the block. Her house sat as perfectly groomed as ever, but its windows felt more like sentries than glass. Something was coming. Anna just didn't know what form it would take. What arrived was not dramatic, but it was calculated. She received a notice in her mailbox, hand-delivered and bearing the stamped seal of the Residential Aesthetic Oversight Committee. This time citing her property for non-compliance due to overgrowth along the western edge of lawn and a mailbox deemed inconsistent with community aesthetic regulations. The mailbox had been there since she moved in. The grass along the edge had barely grown past her ankle. But the point wasn't actual violation. It was pressure, bureaucracy weaponized through petty rules to create friction. It was paper cuts designed to bleed her slowly. She didn't ignore it. She photographed her lawn, printed out a copy of the regulation packet from the association website, highlighted the sections showing her full compliance, and submitted an official rebuttal. But the process took time. It forced her to write letters, attach documentation, hand-deliver a packet to the clubhouse. Each step wasn't just a task, it was a delay. A small detour that chipped at her energy, her resolve. That was the game now, death by 10,000 paper cuts. Denise confirmed it during one of their increasingly brief phone calls. "They're doing this because they can't win on the sidewalk," she said. "So they'll keep circling, hoping you run out of stamina. But you're still on record. The city hasn't dropped the investigation." It wasn't much of a comfort. Then came the committee hearing. Not about Anna, at least not officially. It was framed as a general community update, but the timing was suspicious, as was the location, the same meeting hall where Anna had been reprimanded weeks earlier. She debated not attending, but something in her warned that staying away would allow others to control the narrative. So she went. The hall was more crowded this time, with chairs packed shoulder to shoulder and the low murmur of restless voices. The head of the committee opened with innocuous updates, budget reviews, tree trimming schedules, and upcoming pancake breakfast. But then the tone shifted. One of the subcommittee members, an older man in an ill-fitting polo, cleared his throat and began speaking about recent events that have brought tension to our community. He never said Anna's name. He didn't have to. He referred to escalated actions, external interference, and individuals pursuing personal agendas at the cost of collective harmony. Then Karen stood. She wasn't officially on the agenda, but no one stopped her. She stepped forward, a folder in hand, her hair pinned precisely, her voice soft but clear. "I've lived here 21 years, she began, "and never have I felt more disrespected in my own neighborhood. What's being framed as discrimination is, in fact, a matter of emotional safety. I suffer from anxiety. I use my garden as therapy. These planters are part of that space. It's not just about aesthetics, it's about wellness. And while I sympathize with everyone's personal challenges, they do not entitle someone to destroy what others have built." There were a few nods, not loud support, but just enough to shift the air in the room. Anna sat still, listening. She had expected a performance, but Karen had elevated it to art, framing herself as a victim, cloaking territorial aggression in the language of vulnerability. There were even photos, Karen holding a letter from her doctor, though no one saw what was written on it. It's just the image, just the implication. Sympathy without scrutiny. Anna didn't speak that night. She could have. She had brought a copy of the ADA ruling, a statement from Denise, even photographs of the alternative route they were forced to take every day. But she didn't, because it would have changed nothing in that room. She realized at the moment Karen used the word therapy. The moment the word anxiety landed like a shield over everything else. Logic would not win here. Not tonight. She left early. When she got home, Tom was already asleep. She stood outside his door for a long while, listening to his breathing, watching the soft rise and fall of his chest in the glow of the hallway light. He was the reason she had come here, the reason she kept pushing, but he was also the one who would feel the impact of every stone they threw. Every look, every cold shoulder, every whispered comment he wouldn't fully understand yet would still internalize. The weight of being the problem. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, folder spread, maps, documents, emails, and timelines scattered like the pieces of a case file. She wasn't building a war. She was building a record, a structure, something stronger than their whispers. A framework no subcommittee could override. The next morning, she called a lawyer. Not for a lawsuit, at least not yet, but to have someone review the association bylaws and evaluate how far their authority truly extended. The attorney, a calm-voiced woman named Lydia, listened without interruption and agreed to review everything Anna had. "I can't promise much," she said, "but I can promise they'll think twice before sending you another notice." It was a start. In the days that followed, Anna became meticulous. She documented everything. Every interaction, every letter, every moment Tom was forced into the street due to the obstruction. She saved emails, recorded calls with city departments, even tracked the hours spent rerouting their daily walks. She wasn't collecting data for revenge. She was collecting evidence for when patience finally ran out. And still, the planters remained. But something had shifted not just in Anna, but in how she was being watched. Some neighbors now nodded as she passed. One even stopped her quietly to ask how her son was doing, their voice hushed but sincere. It wasn't an apology, but it was an opening. And then, finally, came the letter from the city. The planters were in violation. The property owner had 14 days to remove them or face direct intervention and daily fines. Anna read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully, set it on the table, and said nothing. She didn't smile, didn't cheer, because she knew what came next. This wasn't over. But the ground was finally beginning to shift. The notice from the city arrived folded into a standard white envelope without fanfare or flourish, but Anna understood the weight of it the moment she held it in her hands. It was thin, just a single page, but its contents carried the quiet force of law behind them. The wording was concise, bureaucratic, and cold. The planters obstructing pedestrian access along Willow Loop were in violation of Municipal Code 4.17 billion regarding uninterrupted pedestrian right-of-way. The property owner had been given 14 calendar days to comply. If no action was taken, the city would initiate removal at the owner's expense and issue daily fines thereafter. There was no room for interpretation, no plea for leniency. The time for community diplomacy had expired. Anna didn't rush to tell anyone, not even Denise, though she forwarded a copy of the notice as protocol required. She didn't allow herself a moment of triumph, because she knew intimately, instinctively, that a countdown like this didn't just force compliance, it provoked retaliation. And she was right. It began quietly. 3 days after the notice, she received another letter, this time slipped directly under her door while she and Tom were out. No envelope, just a single sheet of paper folded once, typed in bold, "You might win the sidewalk, but you're losing everything else." No signature, no other message. Anna didn't react. She unfolded it, scanned it again, then placed it in the file she now kept on top of her refrigerator, too high for Tom to reach. The file was thicker now. Dozens of pages documenting every move, every conversation, every intimidation tactic, and the growing evidence of what had slowly become a pattern. Not of disagreement, but of harassment. That night, she left her porch light on. It wasn't a fear reaction. It was a warning shot of her own. She was awake, watching. The 4th day brought another escalation, this one more invasive. As she and Tom returned from a therapy appointment, they found the side gate to their backyard swung wide open, the latch broken. Nothing had been taken, nothing destroyed, but the garden beds had been trampled, the soil kicked up in uneven patches, as though someone had walked through aimlessly, just to let her know they could. She called the non-emergency police line and filed a report. The officer who came was young, polite, and clearly aware of the neighborhood dynamics. He took photos, asked standard questions, and gently suggested that perhaps it was just kids playing a prank. Anna stared at him and replied with a calmness that made the young man shift uncomfortably. It's not a prank when it happens after a legal notice. And it's not kids when the path through the yard avoids every camera angle. He nodded, said he'd file the report, and left. She didn't expect follow-up. She just wanted it on record. The 5th day came with a formal letter, this time from a law office. It was addressed to Anna, but the content made it clear it was speaking to something broader. Karen, through legal counsel, was challenging the city's authority to enforce the sidewalk violation, claiming that the original neighborhood blueprints granted a decorative exception along the frontage of her lot. The letter argued that the planters were part of a long-established neighborhood beautification easement and that any attempt to remove them would constitute both property damage and a violation of homeowner autonomy. It was filled with vague references to case law and precedents that didn't apply, but Anna could see the strategy: delay, confuse, force the city into reevaluating their position. Denise confirmed it. We've seen this before. They're using ambiguity as a weapon. People will respond, and it won't hold up in court, but it may buy them time. Anna nodded, but inside she felt the pulse of something darker beginning to rise. The seventh day changed everything. Tom had a field trip with his school, an afternoon event at the local science center. He was excited not just because he loved space exhibits, but because, for once, he felt included. The school had made arrangements for accessible transportation, something Anna had fought to ensure. She had packed his bag the night before, tucked in a note, and watched him leave with a mix of pride and nerves. The house felt impossibly quiet after he left. Too quiet. Anna tried to use the time productively reviewing lesson plans, responding to a few emails from concerned neighbors who had finally begun to reach out privately, but her mind kept drifting back to the silence. Then, just after 1 p.m., her phone rang. It was the school. The voice on the other end was strained, calm but careful. Ms. Morton, Tom is fine, please don't panic, but there was an incident. While leaving the science center, his wheelchair malfunctioned. One of the rear wheels detached while moving down the access ramp. He wasn't hurt, but he fell. Our staff responded immediately, and he's being monitored by the nurse. Anna's breath caught. Her legs moved before she consciously made the decision. She was in the car before the call ended. Every red light, every slow driver became a physical ache in her chest. By the time she reached the school, Tom was already waiting in the nurse's office, his face pale but brave. It just came off, he said quietly. I didn't hit anything. It just came off. Anna knelt, checked his arms, legs, and hands. He was scraped but intact. The chair, however, wasn't. The wheel bolt had been sawed, not worn, tampered with. The nurse was already aware. The principal was called. A second officer arrived, more serious this time. A report was filed. Photos were taken. The principal, visibly disturbed, asked if Anna wanted to postpone the AD presentation she had agreed to give at the next board meeting. She said no. Now more than ever, she needed to be heard. At home, after the storm of adrenaline passed and Tom was resting, Anna opened her laptop. She wrote a single email to her attorney, Lydia. We're done waiting. File the full complaint. Within 24 hours, Lydia submitted a formal legal action for harassment, negligence, and willful obstruction of federal disability law. She named the association, Karen, and the architectural committee members who had supported the illegal encroachments. The suit was narrowly tailored but powerful. It didn't ask for astronomical damages. It asked for injunction, for removal, for policy change, and it demanded oversight. The backlash came quickly. By the 9th day, anonymous flyers began appearing on community boards and windshields clearly designed to look like official association notices, but filled with inflammatory statements. Do we want litigious neighbors ruining our community? And don't let one complaint destroy decades of tradition. Anna didn't respond, but she did collect them, took pictures, noted times and dates. On the 12th day, the city responded to Karen's legal stalling with a formal decision. Her claims were unfounded, and the sidewalk must be cleared. The letter was copied to all parties. The enforcement window remained open. On the 13th day, just before dawn, someone spray-painted a crude message on Anna's garage door in red letters, "Cripple yourself." She found it before Tom woke up, covered it with a tarp, called the police. Another report. Another set of photos. No suspects. No cameras caught it. But she knew, and so did the city. Day 14 arrived with no movement from Karen. So at 8 a.m., sharp, 2 municipal trucks pulled up at the end of Willow Loop. Workers stepped out, began setting up cones. Anna stood at the edge of her driveway and watched, arms crossed, heart steady. Karen came out 3 minutes later. She was screaming. She waved documents, yelled about legal rights, called someone on her phone and demanded to speak to a supervisor. But the workers had the order. They began removing the planters one by one, carefully placing them onto pallets. The solar lights were unplugged. The stakes pulled. The walkway cleared. Anna didn't gloat. She didn't even look in Karen's direction. She simply watched the sidewalk being restored. 1 foot. 1 inch. One rightful piece at a time, because the war wasn't about winning in one grand moment. It was about making sure there was no room left for people like Karen to pretend they owned what never belonged to them. The morning after the city removed the planters, there was a stillness in the neighborhood that felt almost unnatural, as though the very air around Willow Loop had paused to see what would happen next. The sidewalk, now unobstructed, gleamed pale in the early sunlight. Where once there had been heavy terracotta barriers and ornamental stakes, there was now only clean concrete, bare and open. It looked like any other stretch of suburban pavement, unremarkable to anyone else, but to Anna, it was the beginning of something larger than it appeared. For the first time since she'd moved in, there was a clear path for her son, one that didn't require a detour or a compromise, one that didn't come with the weight of someone else's control. But silence, as Anna had learned, was never safety in this place. It was preparation. Karen didn't speak publicly that first day. Her windows remained shuttered, her front yard untouched. No gardening, no walking her dog, no carefully posed strolls to the mailbox. It would have been easy to believe she was retreating. But Anna had lived too long with quiet hostility to fall for that illusion. By now she recognized the rhythm. The pullback was not surrender. It was the breath before the blow. The attack came from the one place Anna hadn't yet seen weaponized zoning and permit enforcement. 2 days after the removal, a city official knocked on Anna's door with a clipboard in hand and a surprisingly apologetic expression. He explained that a complaint had been filed alleging that modifications to Anna's front yard, the new pavers, the extended garden beds, and a small wooden planter box Tom had built as part of a therapy project violated local landscaping ordinances. Anna didn't raise her voice or argue. She asked to see the complaint. The man hesitated but showed her the form. The signature was redacted, but the details were unmistakable, specific to her yard, her property, her life. Anna thanked him, then handed him a folder of permits and inspection records, including one signed off just 3 weeks prior approving the updates. The man nodded, embarrassed, and left. She knew he wouldn't be back. But it wasn't about the enforcement. It was about being watched. It was about reminding her that she wasn't invisible, that her resistance hadn't gone unnoticed. The next morning, Tom asked a question she wasn't prepared for. They were sitting at the table, eating breakfast, the window behind them open to the breeze now flowing unobstructed across the street. If she put them back, he said, what would happen? Would they just take them again? Anna paused, her spoon hovering above her cereal. The city would issue another order, but it would take time. There'd be hearings, maybe more delays. But could she do it? She could try. Tom was quiet, chewing slowly, and then he said, almost to himself, then what was the point? The question hit her harder than any complaint, any insult, any vandalism. Because it was the one she had been asking herself in the early hours of the morning when she couldn't sleep. What was the point if nothing truly stayed fixed? If it could be undone with a signature or another lie? Later that afternoon, Anna received a certified letter. It was from Karen's attorney. It informed her that a civil suit had been filed against her for emotional distress and reputational harm resulting from the forced removal of decorative installations that held significant therapeutic and symbolic value. The amount sought was laughable $50,000, but the purpose was clear. Intimidation through litigation. Punishment for defiance. It wasn't about money. It was about making her question her stamina, her resolve, her ability to keep going. Anna brought the letter to Lydia that same day. Her attorney was already expecting it. "We'll countersue," she said flatly. "We'll move to dismiss and pursue damages under ADA retaliation provisions." I've seen this tactic before. It's theater, expensive, time-wasting theater. But don't underestimate her. People like that are often willing to burn down the building just to keep others out. Anna nodded, folded the paper again, and left without a word. On the way home, she didn't take the usual route. Instead, she drove past Karen's house deliberately, slowly. The lawn was pristine, but the curtains didn't move. She wondered, briefly, if Karen was watching from somewhere inside. She hoped she was. That night, Anna sat on the porch with Tom. The heat of summer was finally beginning to break, and the evening carried that first hint of the coming season, cool, quiet, touched with the faintest trace of drying leaves. Tom was reading a book, his feet resting on a stool, a small bandage still on his hand from the field trip fall. Anna watched him, wondering again if all of this, every letter, every argument, every insult had been worth it. Not just for the sidewalk, but for what it meant, for what it had taken out of them both. "I saw a kid today," Tom said suddenly, not looking up from his book. He was in a chair, too, but his sidewalk had a ramp with a rail. His mom said the city built it after they complained. Anna turned her head slightly. "Did you talk to him?" "A little. He said he likes it better now. Before, he used to stay inside more." Anna didn't respond right away. She just nodded and reached over to touch his shoulder. The next morning, she was awoken not by her alarm, but by the sound of voices outside, urgent, sharp, unmistakably angry. She pulled on a sweater and stepped outside. 2 city officials stood on the sidewalk. Between them was a man in a dark blue polo, with a clipboard, gesturing furiously toward the now clear pathway. "You had no right," he was saying. "This entire thing was handled wrong. I filed an injunction. You're going to regret interfering." Karen appeared a moment later, flustered and flushed, holding another set of documents and waving them like a shield. The officials remained calm, pointing to a laminated copy of the enforcement order. One of them turned toward Anna. "We're conducting a follow-up," he said. "EMS Carlisle," he nodded toward Karen, "is attempting to present new documentation claiming ownership of the easement itself. We've already confirmed that the legal boundary maps override anything she's provided." Anna didn't reply. She simply stood there, arms folded. But Karen wasn't finished. She turned to Anna suddenly, eyes blazing, voice sharp enough to pierce the morning air. "You think you've won?" she said. "You've turned this place into a spectacle, into a battlefield. You're not a hero. You're just a woman with a crippled kid and too much time on your hands." The officials turned in unison. One of them raised a hand. "That's enough, ma'am." But Anna didn't flinch. She walked forward slowly, past the men, until she stood just at the edge of the sidewalk, looking directly at Karen. Her voice was steady, not loud, not theatrical, just true. "You didn't lose because of me. You lost because you believed no one would ever challenge you. You thought you could decide who mattered here. But you don't get to choose whose life is visible. You don't get to erase people because they don't fit your aesthetic." Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hands trembled slightly. Anna didn't wait for a reply. She turned and walked back inside. Later that day, the lawsuit was dismissed by the city attorney's office before it even reached court. The grounds were simple. The complaint had no standing, and the ADA protections applied clearly and without ambiguity. A countersuit remained on the table. Karen didn't come outside again, and the sidewalk remained clear. Not because Anna had shouted the loudest, not because she had won some grand ideological war, but because she had refused to yield. Because even when the system bent under pressure, she held it accountable. Because sometimes the most powerful resistance is simply persistence in the face of exhaustion. And because every inch of that concrete path, every legal form, every photo, every second of silence she had endured was part of a long, hard road toward something better. For Tom, for all the children like him, and for the parents who would walk behind them, clearing the way. Autumn arrived slowly that year, as though the season itself was hesitant to touch what had already been scorched. The trees lining Willow Loop began to shed their leaves in delicate, rust-colored flurries, carpeting the sidewalks in amber and gold. For the first time since she had moved in, Anna found herself walking those streets without scanning for threats, without checking every corner for signs of surveillance, without the quiet tension that had gripped her spine for months. The sidewalk remained clear. The air, once thick with hostility, now carried only the usual suburban monotony: dogs barking, sprinklers hissing to life, wind rustling through hedges. The war, it seemed, had ended. Not with a parade, not with banners or applause, but in the simple, steady way that wounds close, slowly, quietly, and with visible scar tissue left behind. Karen's house stood unchanged, at least on the surface. The shutters were still immaculate, the lawn clipped to military precision, but the vibrancy was gone. The planters had not returned. The garden beds remained untouched, the soil packed flat where once there had been hydrangeas and decorative grasses. No new flowers had been planted, no more solar lights glowing at dusk. It was as if the yard had been abandoned, left in place only because removing it entirely would have required admitting that something had been lost. Karen herself had not been seen publicly since the failed attempt to reclaim the easement. Rumors circulated quietly. Some said she was considering a move, others whispered about health issues, though no one had the facts. Anna didn't concern herself with it. There was no victory in Karen's retreat, only closure. A chapter ended. Nothing more. Tom's world, however, had shifted in a way far more profound. He began to ask again for afternoon walks, something he hadn't done in weeks, and each time they reached the corner of Willow Loop, where the obstruction had once stood, he slowed just slightly, not from fear but from recognition. The memory wasn't gone, but it no longer held weight. They walked that stretch often, and over time it became just another part of the neighborhood, a place to pass through, not something to battle against. On one such walk, Tom stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, bent down to pick up a red leaf, and held it out to Anna with a grin. "We should press this one," he said. She smiled, and they moved on. The lawsuit Anna's attorney had filed remained active for another few months, progressing slowly through the system. In the end, it didn't go to trial. The association offered a settlement, a financial gesture, and, more importantly, an agreement to revise their bylaws in accordance with federal accessibility standards. It wasn't an admission of guilt, but it was a shift in policy, a change that would outlast any apology. Anna accepted the offer not for the money, which she placed into a separate savings account for Tom's future, but because it cemented something in writing. A record, a precedent. Proof that resistance had meaning. The settlement, once finalized, prompted the association to hold a rare community forum. This time it wasn't at the clubhouse, but at a local school gymnasium, open to all residents, no formal agenda. Anna attended quietly, taking a seat near the back, watching the room fill slowly. A few people nodded to her as they passed. One woman, a stranger, perhaps new to the neighborhood, paused to say, "Thank you for what you did. We read about it." That was all. No conversation. Just the quiet gratitude of someone who understood the value of not having to fight the same battle alone. At the forum, the new board president, Harold Pierce, having stepped down citing personal priorities, announced a plan to review all pedestrian pathways in the neighborhood for ADA compliance. The initiative was met with polite applause, but Anna noticed more than a few heads turning toward her, not with scorn now, but with a kind of cautious respect. No one said her name. No one needed to. The sidewalk had become more than pavement. It was a line drawn in the community's consciousness. A reminder that accessibility wasn't an inconvenience. It was a right. At home, things settled into something resembling peace. The front yard, once trampled and vandalized, had been replanted, the flowers now thriving under cooler skies. Tom's therapy sessions continued, and with the improved accessibility in their route, he began venturing a little farther each week. They reached the park on foot, the library, even the diner at the edge of the main road where Anna once feared to bring him for fear of awkward glances. The fear was still there, buried beneath layers of experience, but it had lost its sharpness. One afternoon, as Anna sat on the porch grading assignments while Tom sketched robots in chalk across the driveway, a car pulled up slowly in front of the house. A woman stepped out, middle-aged, carefully dressed, unfamiliar. She introduced herself as the new accessibility consultant hired by the county. She had heard about Anna's case, asked if Anna would be willing to speak at a planning meeting about community integration, policy, and family impact. Anna hesitated. She wasn't someone who sought a stage. She hadn't done any of this for recognition. But when she glanced over at Tom, still laughing at something he'd drawn in bright blue lines, she nodded. "Yes," she said. "If it helps others get through this faster than we did, I'll do it." Because that was the truth. The sidewalk wasn't just about cement or laws or one angry woman with a sense of control too large for her own yard. It was about not having to explain, not having to fight every step of the way just to exist in public space. It was about making sure no other parent had to stand in a community meeting and beg for a basic human accommodation. And most of all, it was about walking, rolling, moving forward, freely and without fear. So as autumn deepened and the wind picked up speed, as holiday decorations began to appear in windows, and as the neighborhood slowly adjusted to its new normal, Anna and Tom walked. Not because they needed to, but because they could. Because the path was finally open. Because every inch of it had been claimed with patience, with grit, and with the unwavering belief that access wasn't a favor to be granted. It was a promise. And now it had been kept.